24 hours later, Karen sat in her home office, hair still slightly damp and pride thoroughly wounded, crafting what she considered a masterpiece of formal complaint writing. Her laptop screen glowed with righteous indignation as she typed emergency HOA violation report in 18-point bold font. Buttercup nearly drowned. She muttered to her Pomeranian, who was lounging in a tiny terry cloth robe beside her desk. We could have died, both of us, in that death trap he calls a swimming pool. The doorbell chimed, and Karen's heart rate spiked. Through her front window's designer shutters, she spotted the familiar silhouettes of her fellow HOA board members, Margaret Chen and Bob Richardson. She'd called an emergency session, but seeing them on her doorstep made everything feel suddenly real. Karen, what's this about? Margaret asked the moment Karen opened the door. Your text said there was a catastrophic safety violation requiring immediate board intervention. Come in, come in. Karen ushered them toward her dining room, where she'd arranged a presentation setup that would make corporate lawyers weep with envy. Printed photographs, highlighted rulebooks, and a hand-drawn diagram of the incident scene covered her mahogany table. Bob, a retired accountant who joined the HOA board primarily to avoid his wife's honey-do lists, squinted at the evidence. Is that a photo of your dog in a bathrobe? Exhibit A, Karen announced solemnly. Princess Buttercup, post-traumatic stress documentation. Notice the haunted look in her eyes. Margaret picked up the photo. Buttercup looked like every other pampered Pomeranian, slightly confused and mildly irritated. Karen, she looks fine. She's been having nightmares, whimpering at the sound of running water. Yesterday she refused to drink from her crystal bowl. Maybe she's just being picky. This is about more than Buttercup, Karen interrupted, spreading her hands over the documentation like a prosecutor presenting her closing argument. This is about David Martinez's flagrant disregard for community safety and his deliberate circumvention of pool closure regulations. Bob rubbed his temples. Karen, the pool closure thing isn't actually a rule. We discussed this at last month's meeting. You wanted to make it a rule, but we voted it down. Karen's eye twitched. Well, it should be a rule. And more importantly, his negligent fence maintenance created a hazardous situation that endangered community pets. How exactly did Buttercup get into his yard? Margaret asked carefully. Karen straightened her shoulders. She must have found a loose board. Dogs are naturally curious creatures, Margaret. They explore, and when they encounter improperly maintained barriers. Did you check his fence for loose boards? That's not the point. The point is that David Martinez created a dangerous situation and then showed callous disregard for Buttercup's welfare. Bob was already standing up. Karen, I think you might be overreacting here. Nobody got hurt. Your dog is fine. And honestly, if Buttercup got into his yard, that's kind of on you for not supervising her properly. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous maroon. I see, she said quietly. I see how it is. You're taking his side. Both of you. There are no sides here, Margaret protested. This is just neighbors being neighbors. No, Karen said, her voice gaining strength and something that sounded suspiciously like a threat. This is about accountability, and if this board won't hold David Martinez accountable for his actions, then maybe this board needs to be held accountable too. Bob and Margaret exchanged worried glances. They'd seen that look in Karen's eyes before, right before she'd launched her infamous campaign against the Hendersons' non-regulation mailbox that had consumed 6 months of board meetings. Karen, let's all just take a step back. Good evening, Karen said, walking toward her front door with the mechanical precision of someone whose sanity was hanging by a very thin thread. I have some research to do. As the door closed behind them, Margaret turned to Bob. We're in trouble, aren't we? Bob was already pulling out his phone. I'm calling an emergency meeting. Without Karen. Karen Whitfield's perfectly manicured nail tapped against her clipboard as she watched David Martinez drag his pool cover across the water. The audacity. It was only September 15th, and according to Willowbrook HOA Regulation 47B, pools couldn't be closed until October 1st. She'd memorized every line. "Excuse me," she called, her voice carrying across 3 backyards like a foghorn. "Excuse me, Nazar. Ma time easy." David looked up, his shoulders sagging the moment he spotted her power walking across his lawn in her pristine white sneakers. Karen's burgundy tracksuit practically glowed in the afternoon sun, and her silver whistle, yes, she wore an actual whistle, bounced against her chest with each determined step. "You cannot close that pool," she announced, brandishing her clipboard like a weapon. "It's a clear violation of community standards." "Karen, it's my pool, on my property, that I pay for." David's voice had that strained quality of a man who'd had this conversation before. "Wrong." Karen's eyes lit up with the fervor of someone who'd found their life's calling in pool regulations. "Your property deed specifically states that any recreational water feature must remain accessible for community enjoyment until." "It doesn't say that anywhere, Karen." She flipped through her clipboard with theatrical precision. "Page 47, subsection C, clearly states." "That subsection is about sprinkler systems." Karen's face flushed pink, but she rallied quickly. "Well, the spirit of the regulation." A sudden splash interrupted her mid-sentence. Her prized Pomeranian, Princess Buttercup, had somehow squeezed through the fence slats and was now paddling frantically in the deep end, her tiny legs churning like a furry motorboat. "Butter soup." Karen shrieked, dropping her clipboard. "She can't swim. She's a show dog." David stared at the soggy Pomeranian. "Karen, all dogs can swim. It's literally called the doggy paddle." But Karen was already kicking off her pristine sneakers. "You did this on purpose. You lured her in." She pointed accusingly at David while simultaneously pulling her tracksuit jacket over her head. "This is entrapment. I lured your dog into my pool. How exactly did I?" Karen dove in fully clothed, her perfectly styled hair disappearing beneath the surface. She emerged sputtering, mascara streaming down her cheeks like war paint, clutching a thoroughly annoyed Buttercup to her chest. "This isn't over, Martinez," she gasped, treading water with one arm while holding her dog like a wet, furry life preserver. "The HOA board will hear about this. All of it." David watched in stunned silence as Karen dog-paddled to the shallow end, her burgundy tracksuit now clinging to her like a wet sleeping bag. "Hear about what exactly?" "Pool entrapment, negligent fence maintenance, attempted pet napping." She hauled herself out of the pool with all the grace of a beach seal, leaving puddles across his deck. "And I'm adding conspiracy to that list." As Karen squelched across his yard, Buttercup tucked under one arm and her dignity somewhere at the bottom of his pool, David realized this was far from over. Karen Whitfield didn't just hold grudges. She curated them, organized them, and turned them into full-scale neighborhood warfare. The war for Willowbrook had officially begun. Karen had been planning her counterattack for 3 days when she spotted the city inspector's white sedan pulling into David's driveway. She'd called in favors, filed complaints, and may have slightly exaggerated the safety hazards at 1247 Maple Street, but desperate times called for desperate measures. From her bedroom window, she watched through binoculars as David emerged from his house, clearly blindsided by the surprise inspection. The inspector, a tired-looking man with a clipboard that somehow seemed less impressive than Karen's, gestured toward the pool area. "Perfect," Karen whispered, adjusting the focus on her binoculars. "Let's see how Mr. It's My Property handles a real authority figure." But as she watched, something unexpected happened. David didn't look panicked or guilty. He looked confused but cooperative. He walked the inspector around his property, pointing out safety features, showing permits, even demonstrating the pool's filtration system with what appeared to be genuine pride in his maintenance. Karen's triumphant smile began to falter. 20 minutes later, the inspector was shaking David's hand, shaking his hand, like they were old friends. Karen watched in growing horror as David walked the man back to his car, both of them laughing about something. Her phone rang. Unknown number. "Mrs. Whitfield?" This is Inspector Rodriguez with the city. I just finished examining the Martinez property per your complaint. Karen's heart hammered. And, ma'am, I have to ask, what exactly did you think was wrong with that pool? It's one of the best maintained residential installations I've seen this year. All permits current, safety equipment exceeds requirements, and the fence line is actually 6 inches higher than code requires. The binoculars slipped from Karen's numb fingers. But there had to be something. The fence. My dog got through. I examined the fence thoroughly, Mrs. Whitfield. There are no gaps, no loose boards, no access points for a pet. How exactly did your dog enter the property? Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She couldn't very well admit that she'd been so focused on confronting David about his pool closure that she'd failed to notice Buttercup slip through the gate she'd left open behind her. There must have been a gap that's since been repaired. Ma'am, with respect, filing false complaints is a serious matter. I'm required to file a report on this inspection, and I have to note that the complaint appears to have been made in bad faith. The line went dead. Karen stared at her phone, the reality of her situation beginning to crystallize. She'd escalated this beyond neighborhood politics. She'd involved city officials. She'd made accusations that were now officially documented as baseless. A knock at her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw David Martinez standing on her porch, holding an envelope. Karen opened the door with as much dignity as she could muster. David, I suppose you're here to gloat. Actually, no. David held out the envelope. I'm here to give you this. It's a copy of my pool inspection report. Perfect marks across the board. Karen took the envelope with trembling fingers. Why are you giving me this? Because I want you to understand something, Karen. I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to close my pool for the season and get ready for fall cleanup. But you've turned this into something bigger than it needs to be. I was protecting the community. You were protecting your need to control everything around you. David interrupted gently. And I get it. I really do. But this has to stop. Karen looked down at the official report in her hands. All those complaints, all that documentation, all that righteous anger, and she'd been wrong about everything. What happens now? She asked quietly. David studied her face for a long moment. That depends on you, Karen. This can end here, with both of us walking away and trying to be better neighbors. Or, he didn't finish the sentence, but Karen heard the unspoken threat clearly. David Martinez, the quiet neighbor she'd always dismissed as weak and accommodating, had just shown her exactly how much power he'd been choosing not to use. I need to think, she whispered. David nodded. Take your time. But Karen, next time you want to know about pool regulations or fence maintenance or anything else, just ask. You might be surprised by what you learn. As he walked away, Karen closed the door and leaned against it, clutching the inspection report. For the first time in years, she had no idea what her next move should be. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice was whispering that maybe, just maybe, she'd been the problem all along. But Karen Whitfield had never been good at listening to small voices, especially ones that suggested she might be wrong.